What we're going to do is invite John de Ramsey to frame out the background to Secret Garden Party, and then the other speakers will share their very interesting experiences with you for around about 3 to 5 minutes, and then we'll have a kind of dialogue, discussion, critique of each other's work, and then we'll sort of start bringing people in and we'll see how that works. You can tell us. And then we'll organise anything else. But I think if you can imagine that your inputs are invited, it's not just a one-way street, that helps a lot. What it's really about is trying to knit together and work out practical guidance and action bullet points for very complex things in 3 categories: places, groups of people, and very important issues. And that's really where all of these discussions and experiences will kind of congregate. How do you get places to really take off with a certain set of people around certain issues that really matter? With that, I will invite John de Ramsey to take us away.
John, thank you very much. Thank you, first of all, for coming. There was an awful moment about a quarter of an hour ago where I thought we were going to outnumber you, so it's great to see so many of you coming. I was going to set the scene, as John has explained, and I haven't got any electronic aids or anything, or as they called it, PowerPoint homicide, so you've just got to listen to me. I won't go back in history too far, but my family have lived around here since the 18th century and been involved in agriculture, mainly as owners of land and not farmers. In the 1930s, when we had a depression bigger than this one, there were 22 farms here, of which 7 were derelict. It was so unprofitable that people just walked off the land with whatever they could carry or put on their cart and horse and went. And so we had a depopulation then, one which is not really remembered, perhaps very much. Then, of course, food became essential to feed the population during the war, and so then the people came back onto the land and it started to go back into production. I started farming in 1962, and then there were probably something like 400 people in and around the 3 villages who were involved in agriculture in one form or another. I mean, there might be blacksmiths, or they might have been carpenters or whatever. There was a lot of skills, a lot of hand skills, and a lot of hand labour. I looked back to see what, when I started, what the employment was, and I checked a farm of 920 acres, and it employed 22 full-time male staff, 8 part-time female staff, and then also itinerant groups of Irishmen and gypsies picking potatoes in the autumn, so a lot of labour. That same acreage today employs 1 man, and that's the problem. That's why our community has gently drifted that way. We haven't had a revolution like we had in coal mining. We've had it over 40 years. And here, I remember thinking how well we'd done it. We never made anybody redundant. We helped them in retirement by part-time employment, etc., so you don't just fall off the cliff. And we thought we were good employers. And I went up to the northwest to an estate belonging to Lord Lonsdale, the Yellow Earl, and we looked there, and he had a motorway service station, a quarry, a woodland enterprise, shooting, fishing, tourism, you name it, he was doing it. And I said to him, of course, you're not a real farmer at all, are you? And he said, you wait, you will have to do it too. I came back here to Arable, East Anglia, thinking that he didn't know what he was talking about. And our general manager, who was the governor of the school at Earthship, said to me, do you realise if we lose any more school children, we'll lose a teacher, and if we lose that teacher, the school will close? And I said, no, I didn't. And I thought, well, why? And then I realised, of course, what I've just summarised to you is that we don't employ people anymore. And that was the heart of the community. And what could we do to restore that? And so he and I drew up a plan for what we wanted to achieve here, which meant more housing that people could actually afford, jobs that weren't agricultural, because clearly there weren't any agricultural jobs, but ones that fitted into the countryside, and that doesn't mean twee craft industries either. It could mean high tech or whatever. And went to the director of planning at Huntingdon District Council and said, this is our plan. And he said, well, that's very nice of you, but that's our job. So I said, yes, but actually try doing it without us. We've actually got to do it together. And so he looked at it and did take it seriously and made some good comments. And he said, but of course, unfortunately, it can never happen. So I said, why not? He said, well, you're not on mains drainage. You can't possibly build more houses if you're not on mains drainage. So I went to Anglian Water, this was before privatisation, and said, we want to be on mains drainage. And they said, 15, 18 years perhaps, you know. I said, I can't wait 15, 18 years. You know, we've got a crisis now, we're going to lose our school. And so we went home, we thought, well, why don't we build our own treatment works? Why do we have to rely on other people? And just the other side of the site, towards Grange Farm, just where you come in, we put a planning application in for a reed bed treatment works for 3 villages. And the sort of, I suppose, too much of a pun really, but the shit hit the fan literally at that point. Because after 3 years, having given us planning permission, the Water Authority would have had to take over the maintenance of it. There were 32 other villages in Huntingdonshire that needed the same treatment. Can you imagine an organisation like that wanted to look after 33 reed bed treatment plants? So of course they didn't. So they then said, well, we've done our sums again. We find that there is room in the Godmanchester works outside Huntingdon after all. We got it wrong. So you can go down to mains drainage. And that is what actually freed us up to do some of the things we have done. We have built 34 houses. Quite a lot of them are expensive, but we've used that money in another way. Because we didn't keep the houses, we couldn't afford to, we sold the building plot. And I know there's a feeling that farmers, what they do is they put money in for planning, they get a great big wad of money, and that therefore the 4-course rotation in East Anglia is now Bali, Bungalows, Barbados. That is not the case. In this case, there were no bungalows and no Barbados. And what we did with the money, we built a few affordable homes. What we did with the money was to develop all the old farm buildings into offices, or workshops, or whatever was appropriate to that particular point. And I have to say, with the planners wading through glue, who didn't want employment in villages, they want them in an industrial estate on the edge of Huntingdon, because they're not interested in communities at all. That isn't what they're there about. They want people in big lumps that are cheap to service, with health, policing, education and so on. They don't want villages. They're all spread about. We're inconvenient. We're difficult to service. And so it was a battle all the way through to get permission. And the planners are wonderful because they have one way of saying yes and 48 different ways of saying no, which can be an environmental reason. They have a phrase called sustainable development, which I won't use myself because it is so meaningless, because it's what a friend of mine calls a slippery concept, i.e. you can translate it in whatever way suits you at that particular point. And so we managed to persuade them to allow us to turn. And these buildings, when you go into Havants Ripton, you don't even know that those old buildings are being used for something non-agricultural. And yet the people who work there, and okay, so they commute there, so they drive there in a car. Some of them live in the village and work there, but a minority of them. You ask them what they think about where they're working. No traffic jams, no queuing, no problem about parking, a village shop, a village pub, more or less everything that they think a community should supply. And that, we had the Telegraph, one of the environmental journalists came down and interviewed them. The first lady talked to said, well, what do you think of working here? And she said, working here, I'd like to live here. And that's what we've lost, of course, is the opportunity for people who work here to live here, because we've got this ridiculous restraint on development, and it's not in order to keep the villages pretty. Because go and look at Saltrey. Now, that's what they call a key settlement. same size as Abbot's Ripton, they've dumped 5,000 people on it. And they've completely ruined it as a result. Instead of small pockets all around the countryside, so we can actually develop a community again that can support a pub and a school. The pub and the village shop here only survive because I think it's part of what we should supply as owners of the properties that we want to let, which is perfectly logical, I think. The result is, though, that I have to subsidise them. I could get a better rent from letting the shop and the pub as a house than I can as a shop and a pub. But I think that's the right thing to do. We have now got 162 non-agricultural jobs in the village, having started with 4. The school, which had got down to 42 children, has got 128 and a waiting list. So that's been successful so far, but we need to go further because we've got to have a community that doesn't need subsidy, because that's shaky. Who knows what the next generations will be prepared to do or to put in from my family or any other family. So we need to have a long-lasting, a community that works in the long term, which I think is probably what sustainable development really means. Now, the reason that we need that is that it all, together with agriculture, an economic community that has an economic heartbeat, looks after the countryside. If you've got bankrupt farmers, you do not get the countryside that any of us want, either environmentally or in landscape terms. So what you need is profits, and that's good because particularly people who live there, they actually spend it on what they see and do. And if they haven't got profits, then we all have to do it. We have to cut corners. And I would like to think that's part of the dairy herd, but it isn't, I'm afraid. Okay. So that's where we've got to in our journey, and this is a very surprising part of the community. Fred came to me and said that this field would be great for a music event, and I thought a couple of hundred people and a few violins, and look what it's grown into, which is terrific. I mean, I really enjoy it. It's such a good event for everybody, and all the local people enjoy it. At last, something interesting is happening in Abbot's Ripton, is a lot of the comments I've had. And 6 people don't, but 6 people wouldn't because they don't agree to anything. So that's where we've got to in our journey, and I think it's been a success so far. I think it's also a blueprint for other people to do the same thing. And there is no prescribed solution to every single community. You have to find your own that suits your area, that suits your talents, whether they're personal talents or the topography around you or whatever. But that's what we need to do, and people need to be freed to do that, and at the moment they're not.